As the name suggests, resource strategy and management is just that. It's coming up with a strategy for how you will support your asset management objectives. As you can see, planning and managing both the internal and external resources to do so across the asset lifecycle. Now, that won't be set in stone. It might be 100% internal resources. It might be mostly external. But what we need to do is be mindful that our strategy needs to shift as the context of our organisation shifts in line with risk and opportunity. We need to be balancing cost, quality, and availability of suppliers, contractors, and staff. We need to be considering as well the life cycle of services, supply chain risk, diversity, equity, and inclusion in resource selection. The world is a different place today. We need to be very holistic in our consideration, and we don't discriminate against minority groups. And then finally there, ensuring that resource plans are aligned with budgets and long-term strategies. But a word of caution, you should determine your resources before coming up with a budget, because if it's driven by the budget without the resources, it's unlikely the organisation won't be able to achieve what it's setting out to do. There will always be a risk in any organisation with competing resources. There could be projects, there could be contracts, different functions trying to place demand on the same resources. We need to understand how conflicts and prioritization is done amicably but consistently in the organisation. Sometimes that will be a very short-term operational decision, sometimes more around delivery, project delivery, or more broadly, that strategic view of the world. So we can implement something along the transparent prioritization framework, communicate again why we chose to trade off in a certain way. This becomes even more important if you're working in a sensitive industrial relations area of the world, industry, etc. Transparency and visibility always wins hands down, but it shouldn't get to a point where people are arguing, but we do need to acknowledge there will be conflicts around both the prioritization and the availability of resources. It's just a fact of life. One reality in any organization. And when you do choose to undertake a resourcing strategy, understanding your current capability, understanding your current competency, because there really is a risk that both staff and contractors lack the skills to deliver against asset management objectives, support services, and of course the asset lifecycle itself. Now, you could go and embark on training, maybe certification, ongoing competence development, and a framework to do so. Or you may choose to pivot as part of your strategy and go external, and then maybe at a point in time start to knowledge transfer that capability back into the organization, and then have that ongoing horizon to build up the internal. Scarcity of resources isn't just the materials, labor hours. It's also to looks at the sustainable supply chain or the network of suppliers that you have. The real risk here is when we become over-reliant on single suppliers, certain suppliers, because what it can do is create vulnerability in the marketplace, but it can also fuel things like a monopoly, collusion, and other behavior out there. So supply chain dependency is a real key topic that you need to look at really seriously. But a way around that, of course, is to develop contingency plans, diversify supplier relationships, even bringing suppliers into the fold even closer into your organization. It's also a good idea to have multiple suppliers, and whilst that may drive a bit of a burden on the administrative and your supply chain internal division, if you like, it's also a good way of keeping everyone honest, visible, and then you are driving the market, not the market driving you, because after all, it is your organization. It is very real that people will feel threatened if an organization goes and undertakes an outsourcing/insourcing model. All of a sudden, is it our capability, our competency isn't good enough, or is it the numbers? So the risk here is staff may resist changes, especially if you start to bring in externals, subcontractors, etc. We need to really, as you can see here, engage openly with staff and unions if applicable, explain the background, the rationale, and approaching it from both a sustainability, adaptability, and an outcome perspective, you will find that stakeholders will understand and listen. Because another way to get around this cultural resistance is to actually ask the workforce, how else can we do it? How else can we do it in the time frame we have to work with? And you'll find, as I have over the years, that invites people in to look at a solution to the problem, not just pouring fuel onto the problem. Sometimes it can feel when we feel the need to engage internally with different functions. It feels like it's slowing it down. We need the resources now. It's going to create bureaucracy. But if you can get in front of that mindset and then integrate across different functions, because the risk is if you don't involve procurement and HR, who really are experts in the field of capability and, of course, the commercials associated with that, you could be introducing a far greater risk. So again, creating that cross-functional resourcing teams also opens up transparency, visibility, and rationale to why certain things and certain decisions were made, but also putting governance structures in place to actually enable the question to be asked, but also to go through so multiple roles are creating that decision, not one person. There is a risk, of course, that resource planning ignores either legislative or even strategic alignment back to sustainability goals, whether they be social, environmental, financial, or even within your own policy in your own organization. One way through this is to acknowledge it upfront that the extent in which your organization will adopt ESGs, etc., and how it's actually looked at across the entire life cycle will also then lead to ways to measure resource usage. Now, whether that's electricity, carbon footprint, but even if it's sustainability of your human capital, the attraction of new staff, the retention of staff, these are all very important factors that become mutually supportive, not mutually exclusive, which then brings us back to the coordinated activity of the organization, but also to healthy life cycle management. Resource strategy and management is a big topic. You get into supply chain, many different topics, but the ones that jump out for me, at least in 55,001, 7.1, looking at resources. Okay, so what have you got? What have you got to work with? What's your capacity to deliver? 7.2, competency. What is the competency of the people I have to do the work at hand? And then, of course, 7.3, awareness. It's funny to say this, but awareness is one of those things that is often overlooked, often assumed. But when people are aware of cost, risk, and performance, value today, value tomorrow, life cycle management, all of a sudden resource strategy and management becomes more of a responsible, outcome-driven discussion, not just one around cost. So in summary, resource strategy and management ensures the organization has what it needs, when it needs it, to deliver value from assets. And we always consider this through the lens of cost, risk, and performance, risk and opportunity.